Hey everyone, my name is Wedge, new standard is here, guilds Ravnica's all over the place, and wow, do I have a sweet tier 1 competitive, extremely budget deck to show you today. Not even kidding. This deck is under $30 right now and is legit competitive. So if you're ready to dive down into new standard on the cheap and win a bunch of games, you've come to the right place. I'll be showing you all of the prices throughout the entire deck tech, and if you want to see the list in full or purchase any of the cards, you can click the first link in the description. I am so excited right now. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and if you do, remember to hit that like button. It helps out a lot. It's the like button. This. Mono Blue Tempo is a nightmare of a deck to play against, especially after rotation. The entire deck revolves around messing with your opponent. If you enjoy slinging disruption, interrupting your opponent's plans, and drawing a bunch of cards, this deck is for you. We'll begin with the creatures. The all-star in the deck is Tempest Djinn. This is how we're gonna win games most of the time. Spoiler alert, the deck runs 21 islands, that's it. So your Tempest Djinn will always be beefy. Most of the time, the endgame for this deck is to stick a Djinn, protect it, and swing in for the win. When it's an 8-4, a 10-4, or a 6-4, you get the picture. And thanks to evasion, can't be chump blocked that easily. It's kind of nasty stuff. Remember, this deck is about tempo, so messing with your opponent's flow of the game. That's why we're running 4 Merfolk Trickster, perfect for this deck. It flashes in at the end of your opponent's turn, taps something really important, and silences its abilities for a turn, letting you swing in for at least a couple of damage. Something important to note about this deck: tempo wins by beating face slowly. You have to prioritize these little opportunities to get in for a few points of damage. Trickster lets you do that. It's a great card. Along similar lines, Exclusion Mage is also in this monster. This card really is a bad dream come alive. Exclusion Mage adds to the tempo nonsense of this deck by dropping as a 2/2 and returning our opponent's biggest threat, essentially time walking us. We get an additional 2/2, they lose a blocker so we can swing in easier, and they have to replay it. Time walk never looked so good, except for, when it was actually time walk, but delicious. I love tempo decks. With all of this disruption and craziness, we need some card filtering and card advantage. The deck runs a pair of Nightveil Sprite. This card is better than it looks. 2 mana for a 1/2 flyer that isn't all that amazing, but being able to surveil on attack, now that's something I can get behind. It has evasion, so it won't be blocked very easily, which means you shouldn't have a problem surveilling a number of times before your opponent has to remove this. Plus, it'll work really well with one of the cards I'm talking about next. Wink, wink. Like I mentioned before, this deck is about getting incremental damage throughout the game. This deck isn't going to deal 20 damage in one turn, at least most of the time. We'll talk about that later. But for right now, we have to focus on the idea that tempo is about adjusting the pace of play in your favor, getting in a little damage here and there, and messing with your opponent so much they can't ever regain their balance. To do that, gotta draw cards, lots of them, which is why this competitive deck runs Miscloaked Herald. I crap you not, this is actually real. Alongside a playset of Curious Obsession, we start to see the real strategy come together. The Obsession is actually one of the most powerful cards in this deck and fuels the tempo shenanigans for the entire game. Putting this on a Herald that can't be blocked, that's so much card advantage, and you're getting in for 2 damage each time. There's never a reason not to attack with the Herald, so the Obsession won't die either unless the Herald gets removed. And remember the Nightveil Sprite we just talked about? Surveil on attack, draw on combat damage to a player. You want to talk true card advantage? Now that's card advantage. You know what? Not enough card advantage. It isn't enough. This deck attacks all the time. Maybe it only attacks for 1 damage, but that's still attacking, and that's why Chart a Course makes the cut. This card is hysterically good. 2 mana for 2 cards all of the time, constantly. Basically, every time you want to cast this, you will draw 2 cards and discard nothing. Great refueling for a deck that needs constant gas. Pretty easily justifiable inclusion here and not much more to say. Just remember to cast it after you attack, crazy kids. Hey, I heard that. You thought we were going to leave our value creatures out to dry? You thought we weren't running any protection at all? Heck no, how dare you? The deck runs a playset of Siren Storm Tamer to start our Disruption engine. Another creature that can carry the Curious Obsession really well. It has flying, so it evades most blocks, and it'll get in for a bunch of damage because your opponent will not want to spend removal on this early. Best part is that it's also protection against removal. Siren Storm Tamer just is a counterspell in this deck more often than not. Whenever it hits the battlefield, it tells the opponent that they now need 2 spot removal spells to deal with whatever they actually want to kill. It taxes them hard. Amazing addition to this deck, full playset, no question, so good. Again, protecting our creatures is everything, so going a bit deep on disruption and protection, it makes sense in a tempo deck. We're running a pair of Dive Down. This card is actually busted here. Super cheap at 1 mana. If the opponent flashes in something that somehow can block and kill whatever we're attacking with, the toughness boost helps, and it essentially counters a removal spell, which are the spells we care about most. I'll gladly run some 1 mana counter spells. It seems broken to me. Speaking of 1 mana counterspells, we've got Spell Piersall up in here. Solid early game counterspell against early game removal that we really don't want taking out our Herald or Tricksters or Storm Tamers. Gotta force them to use as many cards as possible as fast as possible to make room for our Djinn to be down. In addition to Spell Pierce, Wizard's Retort is in the deck as a full playset. We're running 10 Wizards, so triggering the Retort's cost reduction isn't going to be too difficult, but even if we don't have it active, it's still a perfectly serviceable counter, considering most of the deck is dirt cheap on cost anyways. Having 3 mana open isn't the biggest ask, just saying. The last counterspell in the deck is Essence Scatter. Most of the time we're okay with letting the opponent play whatever fatty garbage they have, but Essence Scatter is here to disrupt the truly dangerous creatures, the ones that can win through our tempo disruption game, namely hexproof creatures. Countering them really is our only avenue of counterplay, so prioritize Essence Scatter in the main, we need it. Probably my favorite spell in the entire deck is up next, and oh my Jeebus, you are going to love this. Metamorphic Alteration. Oh yes, we're so deep in this right now. This might not seem like the type of card that would go into this deck, but believe me, it totally is. Look at the creatures we're running. Miscloaked Herald, Trickster, Exclusion Mage. These are all tiny creatures. Think about the rest of the meta right now. Steel Leaf Champion is running wild all over the place. So why not let them play their champion and then we just copy it with the alteration, turning our tiny creatures into beefcakes for 2 mana. That's so good. And it isn't like we lose anything morphing an Exclusion Mage or Merfolk Trickster. Once they enter the battlefield, their jobs are done, which means using them with something like the alteration gives them a ton of additional value, provides us with big threats, and forces the opponent to answer even more questions than we're already asking them. Hey, can you deal with this 1/1 unblockable with Curious Obsession? Can you deal with this 8/4 Tempest Djinn with flying? Can you deal with this Merfolk Trickster that is now an 8/4 Tempest Djinn with flying? Do you see where I'm going with this? I understand this might seem janky to you, but never underestimate tempo decks. Tempo decks change the meaning of power in Magic. In this deck, Metamorphic Alteration will win you games, and that's funny as heck. As previously mentioned, the deck runs 21 islands, and that's it for lands. You don't want to splash any other color. You don't want to run shock lands to splash those other colors. You do not want to run anything else besides basic islands. You know why? Tempest Djinn. This thing is our main win condition, and it only counts basic islands, not island types. Tempest Djinn deserves an entirely basic blue mana base, and you might think that's going overboard, but let me explain. Tempest Djinn is the bomb in this deck. It's the card that you revolve your protection around. You don't drop this Djinn on turn 3. You drop it when you have the mana and resources to protect it. All of your other creatures are designed to mess with your opponents and draw all of their removal out, which pressures them on the ground. But the Djinn, this dude is the closer. He ends the game, so make sure to give him the treatment he deserves. Now let's talk strategy, then sideboard. Man, this deck is awesome. Mono Blue Tempo is unlike most other decks in a lot of ways. It plays a super low to the ground curve but isn't looking to deal a billion damage on turn 3. It's looking to knock the opponent off balance with cards like Exclusion Mage. It's looking to drop an early Herald enchanted with an Obsession and begin a card advantage engine. It's looking to disrupt the opponent and whittle them down on resources. Having more cards than your opponent, that's the name of the game. With Charter Course and the Obsession, you need to keep drawing. Keep cycling through your deck, keep fixing the top of it with Night Veil Sprite, all the while protecting the board with 15 total disruption spells. This isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Don't hesitate to drop a Trickster, tap their blocker, and get in for a few damage. Don't hesitate to attack with your 1/1s as long as they can get through. This is about incremental damage and applying constant pressure. So cool. I'm not even gonna lie, this deck is actually really cool and super cheap. God, I love it. Alright, sideboard time. This is the new standard format and we really don't know how it's going to shape up, so I'm going to give you some general sideboard advice and you can adapt as the meta evolves. Thanks to some masters of this deck, sideboard advice seems pretty consistent across the board. Graveyard nonsense does exist, and while you will normally try to just go faster than the graveyard decks, I understand if you want a silver bullet. The best one is probably Sentinel Totem. It scries, is really cheap to cast, and nukes the entire graveyard pretty decent. Then we have any kind of token nonsense or decks on the ground that are trying to overwhelm us. Diamond Mare and Sleep are both top-notch for these matchups. The Mare is a key blocker and helps the incremental life gain since we are a mono blue deck, and Sleep is pretty self-explanatory. You use this, they have no blockers for 2 turns, that's all I need to know. The last strategy we know will exist is Control. There are a bunch of variants running around right now, but I'm sure as the meta settles down, Control will as well. You have to watch out for these decks, which means prioritizing more counterspells. Put more counterspells in your sideboard. These matchups will often turn into counter wars, and you'll probably end up winning by attacking with a 1/1 or a 2/2 a bunch. You want Negate, you want Disdainful Stroke, you want Syncopate. You want all of these counterspells in addition to the ones you're already running. Becoming more reactive, take out all of the creatures that don't do anything since control decks aren't running creatures. You got this, just overload on these spells and you'll be fine. Mono Blue Tempo plays unlike any other low-to-the-ground deck. Your job is to make your opponent really uncomfortable with the game state, almost literally knock them off balance. If messing with the opponent in as many ways as possible, while also drawing a bunch of cards, sounds good to you, then Mono Blue Tempo might be the perfect deck for you. Just saying, it's amazing, and again, it's only $30. How can you go wrong there? If you want to see the list in full or buy the thing for basically nothing, click the first link in the description. You will not regret it. And finally, if there's something you want to see on the channel, please let me know in the comments, and please upvote other comments with suggestions you like. Helps me out a bunch, and as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Mono Blue Tempo plays unlike any other load. Great.